The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, and I stepped into the lion's den. 32nd floor. Hartwell Industries. Corner conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. This was where the real decisions got made, where careers lived and died, where millions of dollars changed hands with the stroke of a pen, where 8 of the most arrogant men I'd ever encountered were about to get the shock of their lives. But they didn't know that yet. All they saw was me, Elena Rodriguez, the quiet girl in the worn black flats and discount blazer, carrying a silver tray loaded with their morning coffee. The girl who'd been invisible to them for 3 long months. The girl they'd dismissed, mocked, and treated like she was less than human. They had no idea they were looking at their new boss. "She's just here to serve coffee," one of them said, as I pushed through the heavy glass doors. His name was David Chen, though he'd never bothered to introduce himself to me. Senior account manager, corner office on the 28th floor, drove a Tesla Model S that probably cost more than most people made in 2 years. He was talking to Thomas Reed, the head of business development, a man who wore custom-tailored suits and had never spoken directly to me. Only at me, like I was a piece of furniture that occasionally needed to be moved. They didn't even look at me when I walked into the room. No hello, no eye contact, just silence and smirks. The conference room was a monument to corporate excess. The table was genuine mahogany, imported from Honduras and polished to a mirror shine. The chairs were Italian leather, each one worth more than I was supposedly making in a month. The walls were lined with awards and certificates, photographs of handshakes with politicians and celebrities, all designed to intimidate and impress. I placed the coffee tray on the table like I was told, my movements careful and deliberate. The china cups rattled softly against their saucers. Wedgwood, of course, because even their coffee service had to project superiority. The aroma of the premium Colombian blend filled the room, mixing with the scent of expensive cologne and the underlying smell of greed that seemed to permeate every surface. "Make sure mine's not too hot this time," Michael Torres called out without looking up from his phone. He was the Director of Human Resources, a title that would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. The man had about as much humanity as a tax form. "Last time it was practically boiling. What are you trying to do, burn my tongue off?" I nodded silently, testing the temperature with the back of my hand before pouring. Not because I cared about his comfort, but because I'd learned that any excuse to complain would result in a 15-minute lecture about competence and paying attention to details. "And make it stronger," added James Walsh, the CFO. He was scrolling through emails on his tablet, his manicured fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. "This isn't Starbucks. We need real coffee here. Not that watered-down garbage." Again, I nodded. I'd been perfecting their coffee preferences for months now, learning exactly how each man liked his caffeine delivered. David took his black with 2 sugars. Thomas preferred cream. No sugar. Michael wanted it barely warm with artificial sweetener. James liked it strong enough to wake the dead. But it wasn't really about the coffee, was it? It was about power. About making sure I knew my place in their carefully constructed hierarchy. About reminding me every single day that I was nothing more than a servant in their kingdom. If only they knew the truth. As I moved around the table, filling cups and arranging napkins, I caught fragments of their conversation. They were discussing the quarterly reports, complaining about underperforming accounts, talking about which departments needed restructuring, corporate speak for mass layoffs. "The Martinez account is bleeding money," David was saying, his voice carrying that particular tone of annoyance that rich men use when discussing amounts that would be life-changing for normal people, but were merely inconvenient for them. "We're 3 months behind on deliverables, and they're threatening to pull the contract." "Maybe we should assign it to someone who actually knows what they're doing," Thomas replied, his eyes following me as I refilled his cup. There was something predatory in his gaze, like a cat watching a mouse. Though I'm not sure we have anyone left with that qualification. They all chuckled at that, the sound sharp and cruel in the morning silence. I kept my face neutral, my movements steady and professional. But inside, I was taking notes, mental recordings of every casual admission, every careless revelation. They had no idea they were confessing their failures to the one person in the room who could actually fix them. The Martinez account they were mocking, I knew exactly why it was failing. David had been skimming funds, inflating expenses, and blaming the client for delays that were entirely internal. I had the receipts, literally. Bank records, falsified reports, email trails that painted a picture of systematic fraud that would make the FBI's white-collar crime division salivate. "Speaking of people who don't know what they're doing," Michael said, nodding in my direction as I arranged sugar packets on the sideboard. "Remind me again why we're paying her? I mean, anyone can pour coffee." "Minimum wage," James replied without looking up. "It's not like we're breaking the bank. Besides, she's manageable, doesn't ask questions, doesn't cause problems. Sometimes you need people who know their place." "Her place," Thomas repeated, and they all shared another laugh. "Right. Well, as long as she stays in it." I finished arranging the coffee service and turned to leave, but David held up his hand like he was stopping traffic. "Wait a minute," he said, snapping his fingers. Actually snapping his fingers at me like I was a dog. "Bring me sugar, will you? That's all you're good for." The words hit me like a physical slap, but I'd been expecting them. This was their game, their daily ritual of humiliation. Every morning, one of them would find some excuse to make me perform an extra task, some small way to remind me that I existed entirely at their pleasure. I nodded, calm, silent, focused. I walked to the sideboard, picked up the crystal sugar bowl. Baccarat. Crystal, naturally, and brought it to David's place at the table. He didn't thank me, didn't even acknowledge that I'd done what he asked, just stirred his coffee with the silver spoon and continued his conversation as if I'd never existed. Anyway, he was saying to Thomas, "I think we need to seriously consider downsizing the Chicago office. Too much overhead, not enough productivity. We could probably cut 30% of the staff and nobody would notice." 30%? Michael raised an eyebrow. "That's pretty aggressive, even for us." "Aggressive times call for aggressive measures," David replied smoothly. "Besides, it's not like most of these people are contributing anything meaningful. Half of them are probably replaceable by AI anyway." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Speaking of replaceable, what about the support staff? Do we really need full-time cleaning crews, food service, administrative assistants? I mean, look at her." He gestured vaguely in my direction. "She shows up, pours coffee, disappears. A trained monkey could do the same job. More laughter. Always more laughter." I turned and walked toward the door, my low heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. Each step was measured, controlled, giving no hint of the storm brewing inside my chest. They wanted me to be invisible? Fine. I'd been invisible for 3 months. I could manage it for 15 more minutes. As I reached for the door handle, I heard the whispers starting behind me. They thought I was out of earshot, but the acoustics in the room were perfect, designed to carry every word to every corner so that no one could claim they hadn't heard what was said. "She probably begged for this job," Michael was saying. His voice low, but not low enough. "Look at her shoes," Thomas added with a snicker. "She's broke as hell. Those things look like she got them at Payless." "If Payless were still in business," David chimed in, "which tells you something about the quality." "I heard she takes the bus to work," James contributed, finally looking up from his tablet. "Can you imagine? In this weather? She probably leaves home at 5 in the morning just to get here on time." "Well, at least she shows up," Michael said with mock generosity. "That's more than we can say for half the people we've hired lately. Remember that disaster in accounting? What was her name? Jennifer something." "Jennifer Walsh," Thomas supplied. "No relation to our esteemed CFO here, thank God. She lasted, 3 weeks? Kept making errors in the spreadsheets." "Errors," David repeated with air quotes. "Is that what we're calling embezzlement now?" They all found that hilarious. I paused at the door, my hand on the brass handle, and let their words wash over me. Every cruel comment, every casual dismissal, every assumption about my circumstances and capabilities. They had no idea I had heard everything. Not just today's conversation, but months of them. I'd been collecting their careless admissions like a magpie collecting shiny objects, building a case that would destroy them all. The truth was, I didn't take the bus because I couldn't afford a car. I took the bus because parking a Maserati in the company garage might have raised some awkward questions. My shoes weren't worn because I couldn't afford better ones. They were worn because I'd been wearing them for 3 months straight, playing a role that required absolute authenticity. Every detail of my appearance, from my discount clothes to my carefully practiced deference, had been designed to make these men see exactly what they expected to see: a desperate woman grateful for any job, no matter how demeaning. And they'd bought it completely. "I give her another month," Thomas was saying as I slipped out the door. "Maybe 2. People like that don't last long in environments like this. They get overwhelmed, make mistakes, eventually just stop showing up." "Good," David replied. "Then we can hire someone younger, maybe someone who actually looks the part." The door closed behind me with a soft click, sealing their laughter inside the conference room. I stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the silence wash over me like a cleansing wave. The corridor stretched in both directions, lined with oil paintings of former company presidents. All men, all white, all wearing the same expression of smug satisfaction that I'd just left behind. In the conference room, my reflection stared back at me from the polished surface of a framed portrait. Dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, minimal makeup, clothes that screamed discount store clearance rack. The perfect picture of someone who didn't belong in this world of marble floors and crystal coffee services. Except I did belong. Here, more than they knew, I walked down the hall toward the supply closet, passing the offices of middle managers and senior executives, each one a shrine to corporate achievement. Golf trophies, industry awards, photographs with dignitaries and celebrities. These people had built their entire identities around their professional success, their ability to climb the corporate ladder and stay there, which made what was about to happen so much more devastating. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a soft vibration that sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A text message from my business partner in Singapore. "Transfer complete. We now own 51% of Hartwell Industries. Board meeting scheduled for 9:30 a.m. Everything ready on your end?" I typed back quickly. "Ready. See you on the video call. 51%. A controlling stake. 3 months of careful stock purchases, shell companies, and strategic acquisitions, all leading to this moment." While David and Thomas and the others were busy humiliating me over coffee service, I'd been quietly buying their company out from under them. The supply closet was on the 29th floor, a cramped space filled with office supplies and cleaning equipment. I'd been using it as my private sanctuary for months, the one place where I could drop the act and be myself for a few precious minutes. I slipped inside and locked the door behind me. From behind a box of printer paper, I pulled out my real phone. Not the cheap prepaid model I carried as part of my disguise, but a top-of-the-line device encrypted with military-grade security. The messages were waiting: updates from my legal team, confirmations from my accountants, status reports from the private investigators I'd hired to document every illegal activity happening within Hartwell Industries. And there was plenty to document. David's embezzlement of the Martinez account was just the tip of the iceberg. Thomas had been selling confidential client information to competitors for 2 years. Michael had been taking bribes from consulting firms in exchange for exclusive contracts. James had been cooking the books to hide their collective crimes, creating a web of financial fraud that would make Enron look like a parking ticket. I'd been building cases against all of them, collecting evidence with the methodical patience of a prosecutor preparing for trial. Bank records, email communications, financial statements, witness testimonies, everything I needed to destroy their careers and send them to federal prison. But that wasn't the real revenge. The real revenge was what was about to happen in the conference room. I checked my watch. 9:25 a.m., 5 minutes until the board meeting. 5 minutes until their world came crashing down around them. I opened my compact mirror, a small, practical thing I'd bought at CVS, and examined my reflection. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the person who'd been sitting in boardrooms from New York to Hong Kong for the past decade. That woman wore Armani suits and Louboutin heels. That woman commanded 7-figure salaries and had her pick of corner offices in any major city in the world. This woman looked tired, overworked, desperate. This woman looked like she'd take any job, endure any humiliation just to pay her bills. Perfect. I closed the mirror and straightened my shoulders. Showtime! The walk back to the conference room felt like a death march, not for me, but for the 8 men who were about to discover that their assumptions about power, privilege, and worth were tragically mistaken. They'd spent their careers believing that respect was something you earned through intimidation, that authority came from making others feel small, that success meant stepping on whoever was beneath you on the ladder. They were about to learn. Otherwise, the elevator ride to the 30th floor seemed to take forever. Music played softly through hidden speakers, some sanitized version of a Beatles song that had been stripped of anything resembling soul or passion. Just like this building, I thought. Just like the people who worked here. Well, most of them. The doors opened and I stepped back into the hallway outside the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see them still sitting around the mahogany table, still talking and laughing, still completely oblivious to what was coming. David was leaning back in his chair, gesticulating wildly as he told some story that had the others in stitches. Thomas was checking his Rolex, probably calculating how much money he'd made while sitting there doing nothing. Michael was texting someone, his fingers flying across his phone screen. None of them noticed me standing there, watching them through the glass like exhibits in a zoo. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Singapore. CEO is in the building. Board members connecting via video conference. Ready when you are? I typed back. On my way. This was it. The moment I'd been working toward for 3 months. The moment when David Chen and Thomas Reed and Michael Torres and James Walsh and all the others would discover that the quiet girl who served their coffee had just become the most powerful person in their lives. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my discount blazer, and pushed open the conference room doors. They were still laughing when I walked in. "Oh, look who's back," Thomas said without looking up from his phone. "Did you bring more coffee? Because this is getting cold." "Actually," I said quietly, "I think we're about to be interrupted." "Interrupted?" David glanced at me with mild annoyance. "By what?" Before I could answer, the door opened again and Robert Hartwell himself walked in. The CEO, the man whose name was on the building, the person who'd founded this company 30 years ago and built it into a billion-dollar empire. The laughter died instantly. Everyone stood up, their chairs scraping against the marble floor as they scrambled to show proper respect. This was a man who could end careers with a word, who controlled the fate of thousands of employees, who was probably worth more than the GDP of some small countries. "Gentlemen," Hartwell said, his voice carrying easily across the room. He was in his 60s, silver-haired and dignified, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most cars. "Please sit down. We have some business to discuss." They sat, but remained tense, ready to spring back to attention at a moment's notice. David straightened his tie. Thomas put away his phone. Michael actually stopped texting for the first time. All morning, I started to back toward the door, assuming I was being dismissed, but Hartwell held up a hand. "Actually, Elena, please stay. This concerns you too." 8 pairs of eyes turned to me with varying degrees of confusion. They'd never heard the CEO use my name before. Hell, most of them probably didn't even know I had a name. "Sir," David ventured carefully, "I'm not sure I understand. We were just about to discuss the quarterly projections and—" "Actually," Hartwell interrupted smoothly, "today's meeting will be led by our new partner." The word partner hit the room like a bomb. Partners in companies like Hartwell Industries weren't hired. They were investors, major stakeholders, people who'd put serious money into the business. The kind of people who could make or break careers with a single decision. "New partner?" Thomas repeated slowly. "I wasn't aware we were bringing in any new investors. Shouldn't we have been briefed on this?" "You should have," Hartwell agreed. "But then again, there are a lot of things you should have been doing that you haven't been." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. These men might have been arrogant and cruel, but they weren't stupid. They could sense when the ground was shifting beneath their feet. Hartwell turned toward the door, and for a moment, everyone's attention followed him. They were expecting someone to walk in, some gray-haired businessman in an expensive suit, someone who looked like them, someone who belonged in their world. Instead, Hartwell looked directly at me. "Elena Rodriguez," he said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. And then the silence hit. Not just quiet, complete, absolute silence. The kind of silence that follows a car crash when everyone's brain is still trying to process what just happened. The kind of silence that precedes earthquakes and avalanches and other natural disasters. I watched their faces change as the words sank in. Confusion first, then disbelief, then dawning horror as they began to understand what was happening. David's coffee cup slipped from his fingers. I heard it hit the table, heard the china crack, heard the hot liquid splash across his precious quarterly reports. But I couldn't look away from his face. from the expression of absolute shock that had replaced his usual smug confidence. Thomas's mouth was hanging open like a fish gasping for air. Michael had gone completely white, his phone forgotten in his lap. James was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles had gone bone white. They couldn't even look at me. And I smiled, and I walked past them, past their gaping mouths and wide eyes and shattered assumptions, and I took my seat at the head of the table. The chair felt different than I'd expected, heavier, somehow, more substantial. This was the seat of power, the place where decisions were made and fates were decided. For 3 months, I'd watched other people sit here while I served them coffee and endured their casual cruelty. Now it was my turn. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice steady and clear. Gone was the quiet deference, the careful subservience I'd practiced for months. This was my real voice, the voice that had closed billion-dollar deals and commanded boardrooms from Tokyo to London. I opened my briefcase. Not the worn canvas bag I'd been carrying as part of my disguise, but a genuine leather portfolio that had cost more than these men spent on lunch, and pulled out a stack of documents. "I believe we have some personnel changes to discuss. If you're loving this revenge story, smash that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me which character you want to see get what they deserve the most, and don't forget to subscribe and share this with everyone who's ever been underestimated at work." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. I could hear everything in that moment. The hum of the air conditioning 30 floors above the Chicago streets, the distant sound of traffic that seemed like it belonged to another world, and the rapid, panicked breathing of 8 men whose entire universe had just collapsed around them. David was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. This has to be some kind of mistake." His face had gone from pale to green, and I could see a thin sheen of sweat forming on his forehead, despite the perfectly controlled climate in the room. I can't just what? I leaned back in the chair that had belonged to them just moments ago, the Italian leather conforming to my body like it had been waiting for me all along. Buy a controlling stake in this company, replace an ineffective board, fire employees who've been stealing from their employer. The word stealing hit the room like a physical blow. David's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish that had been pulled from water and thrown onto dry land. Thomas was shaking his head slowly, his perfectly styled hair falling across his forehead. No, this isn't possible. We would have known if someone was acquiring shares. There are disclosure requirements, SEC filings, all of which were properly filed," I interrupted smoothly. "Through a series of shell companies, investment firms, and international partnerships. Perfectly legal, completely transparent to anyone who bothered to look, which apparently none of you did." I pulled out my tablet, the expensive one I'd kept hidden for 3 months, and swiped to the first document. "Rodriguez Holdings, based in Delaware. Chen Investment Group, incorporated in the Cayman Islands. Martinez Financial Partners, headquartered in Switzerland. All legitimate businesses, all properly registered, all following every securities law to the letter." "Martinez?" David's voice cracked on the name. "You mean the client you've been defrauding?" "Yes." I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "Interesting coincidence, isn't it? Almost like it was planned that way." Michael Torres finally found his voice, though it sounded like he was speaking through a mouthful of cotton. "Ms. Rodriguez, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding here. If you're suggesting that any of us have engaged in improper conduct, I'm not suggesting anything, Michael." The use of his first name made him flinch like I'd slapped him. For 3 months, I'd been "Hey you" and "Coffee girl," and occasionally, when they were feeling generous, "the help." Now I was using their names like I owned them, which technically I did. I'm stating facts. Would you like to hear them? I didn't wait for an answer. I opened my leather portfolio, the expensive one I'd kept hidden in my car for 3 months, the one that contained enough evidence to destroy every man in this room, and pulled out the first folder. "David Chen, Senior Account Manager, Employee ID 4847. You've been systematically overbilling the Martinez account and redirecting the excess funds to a personal account in the Bahamas. Total amount embezzled over the past 18 months, $847,000. Bimdero slid a photograph across the table. It was David at a blackjack table in Las Vegas, surrounded by cocktail waitresses and $1,000 chips, taken the same weekend he'd claimed to be visiting client offices in Phoenix. This was taken at the Bellagio on March 15th. According to your expense reports, you were conducting site visits at Martinez manufacturing facilities in Arizona. Funny thing about security cameras, they're very thorough these days. David stared at the photograph like it was a snake that might bite him. Where did you get this? I have excellent investigators. I pulled out another folder, this one even thicker than the first. Michael Torres, Director of Human Resources. You've been accepting kickbacks from consulting firms in exchange for exclusive contracts with Hartwell Industries. Beacon Consulting paid you $50,000 last year. Sterling Associates paid you $75,000. McKinnon Group paid you $125,000. Michael's face went completely white. Those were consulting fees. Perfectly legitimate. For work you never performed, for companies you never consulted for, paid directly to your personal accounts. I slid another set of documents across the table. These are the bank records, Michael. Your personal bank records. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every time you sold out your own company for a quick payout. The documents scattered across the polished mahogany surface like leaves in a windstorm. Bank statements, wire transfer receipts, email exchanges that spelled out the corruption in black and white. Jennifer Walsh in accounting has been cooking the books to hide the discrepancies. I continued, pulling out yet another folder, though I suppose she had help from someone with access to the company's financial systems. All eyes turned to James Walsh, the CFO, who had been sitting frozen in his chair like a statue. Jennifer isn't even We're not related, if that's what you're implying. I know you're not related, James, but you are business partners. Unofficial ones. I opened his folder, the thickest one yet. You've been manipulating financial reports to hide the missing money, creating false entries to balance the books, and splitting the profits with Ms. Walsh. Did you really think no one would notice that the company's cash flow statements haven't matched reality for over 2 years? James's breathing was becoming labored. I could see sweat staining his expensive shirt, dark patches spreading under his arms despite the perfectly controlled temperature in the room. And Thomas Reed. I turned to the man who'd snapped his fingers at me, who'd treated me like a trained animal for 3 months. You've been selling proprietary client information to our competitors. Hartwell's strategic plans, customer lists, pricing information, bidding strategies. You've been running your own private intelligence service. Thomas tried to stand up, his chair scraping against the marble floor. Now wait just a damn minute. Sit down. My voice cut through his protest like a blade, and something in my tone made him collapse back into his seat. Sterling Dynamics paid you $200,000 for our proposal on the Henderson project. Morrison Industries paid you $150,000 for our client database. TechFlow Solutions paid you $300,000 for our 5-year strategic plan. I pulled out a manila envelope and dumped its contents on the table. Photographs, email printouts, bank statements, recorded phone conversations. You've been selling out your own company for 2 years, Thomas. Every major deal we've lost. Every client who's mysteriously jumped ship. Every competitor who's somehow known exactly what we were planning. That was you. The room erupted into chaos. Voices overlapping, accusations flying, desperate attempts at explanation and denial. David was shouting about entrapment and illegal surveillance. Michael was claiming he'd been set up, that the evidence was fabricated. Thomas was on his feet again, pointing fingers at everyone else in the room. James had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. But I wasn't done. Enough. My voice cut through the chaos like a thunderclap. And they all fell silent. 8. Grown men, all of them older than me, all of them with decades of corporate experience, reduced to silence by someone they dismissed as a coffee-serving nobody. Sit down, all of you. They sat. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice calm and measured. Security is waiting outside to escort you from the building. Your access cards have been deactivated, your company accounts frozen, your personal offices are being searched by federal investigators as we speak. Federal investigators? David's voice was barely a whisper. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division takes embezzlement very seriously, David, as does the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Internal Revenue Service. Funny how crime tends to pile up once you start looking closely. I stood up, smoothing down my simple black dress, the same one they'd mocked for looking cheap, the same one that had allowed me to hide in plain sight for 3 months. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal items before you're permanently banned from these premises. You can't do this, Thomas said, but his voice cracked like a teenager's. We have contracts, employment agreements, severance packages. You had contracts. Those became void the moment you violated your fiduciary duties to this company. I walked to the window, looking out at the city sprawling below. Chicago looked different from up here, more manageable somehow. Your employment agreements contained morality clauses that you've all violated spectacularly. And your severance packages? I turned back to face them. Well, let's just say that people who steal from their employers don't typically qualify for golden parachutes. Michael was frantically scrolling through his phone, probably calling his lawyer. This is harassment. This is entrapment. You can't just infiltrate a company, and I can't infiltrate a company I own, Michael. I returned to my seat at the head of the table, the position that was rightfully mine. I purchased this company through legitimate means, with legitimate money, following all applicable laws and regulations. What you've all been doing, on the other hand, I gestured to the pile of evidence scattered across the table. Bank records, photographs, recorded conversations, financial statements that painted a picture of corruption so extensive it would take federal prosecutors months to untangle. What you've all been doing is called organized crime. The door opened and 3 security guards entered. Professional, efficient, silent. They were followed by 2 people in dark suits, FBI agents, though they didn't announce themselves. They didn't need to. Their presence said everything that needed to be said. Gentlemen, one of the agents said, his voice crisp and official, we're going to need you to come with us. Wait, what about our rights? David was on his feet again, panic evident in every line of his body. Don't we get lawyers? Due process? You'll have plenty of time to call your lawyers from the federal building, the agent replied. Right now, you're being detained for questioning regarding financial crimes committed against Hartwell Industries. As they filed out, these men who'd treated me like I was invisible, who'd dismissed me as nothing more than a coffee server, who'd made every single day a small humiliation, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not the sweet taste of revenge I'd been anticipating for 3 months, just tired. Robert Hartwell remained behind after the others had been escorted out. The FBI agents, the security guards, the broken men who'd been running his company into the ground while lining their own pockets. The conference room felt different now, cleaner somehow, like a weight had been lifted from the very air. Elena, he said quietly, and there was something like awe in his voice. I have to ask, why this way? You could have simply bought the company and cleaned house. You could have hired investigators, brought in consultants, handled this through normal corporate channels. Why put yourself through 3 months of that? I walked back to the window, looking out at the city that stretched to the horizon. Somewhere down there, people were going to work in offices and factories and shops. Most of them decent people just trying to make a living. Most of them would never know that their local news tonight would feature a story about corporate corruption and federal arrests at one of the city's biggest companies. Because I needed to understand exactly what kind of rot had infected this place, I said finally. I needed to see who would show basic human decency to someone they perceived as powerless, and who would reveal their true character when they thought no one was watching. And what did you find? I turned back to him. This man who'd built an empire and then watched it being destroyed from within by people he'd trusted. I found that power doesn't corrupt people, Robert. It reveals them. Those men weren't criminals because they had authority. They had authority because they were willing to be criminals. My phone rang. The real one. Not the cheap decoy I'd carried. For 3 months. The caller ID showed my assistant from my actual office across town, the one where I'd been running a multi-billion-dollar investment firm while pretending to be a minimum-wage coffee server. Ms. Rodriguez, the Wall Street Journal is on line 1. They want to interview you about the Hartwell acquisition, and the Justice Department called. They want to discuss your cooperation in the federal investigation. Tell the Journal I'll take the call in 10 minutes, I said, and schedule a meeting with Justice for tomorrow morning. Full cooperation, complete transparency. I hung up and looked at Robert, who was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Which, in a way, he was. Elena Rodriguez, he said slowly. Rodriguez Holdings. You're not just an investor, are you? I'm the CEO of Rodriguez Holdings, one of the largest private equity firms in North America, I said simply. We specialize in acquiring underperforming companies and turning them around. Usually, that means bringing in new management, improving efficiency, cutting costs where necessary. And in this case, it meant cutting out the cancer. I gestured to the evidence still scattered across the conference table. Your company was being destroyed from within, Robert. Those men stole almost $2 million over the past 2 years. They cost you clients, damaged your reputation, and created a culture of corruption that was spreading throughout the organization. How did you know? I smiled. And for the first time in months, it was a real smile. Not the careful, subservient expression I'd worn as part of my disguise, but the confident smile of someone who just pulled off the most satisfying business deal of her career. Martinez Manufacturing is one of my companies, Robert. When they started having problems with their Hartwell account, when costs kept escalating and deadlines kept getting missed, I sent in investigators. What they found led me here. You've been planning this for 6 months, 3 months of investigation, 3 months of infiltration. I picked up one of the photographs from the table. David at the casino, throwing away money he'd stolen from the very client he was supposed to be serving. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to understand how deep the corruption went, who was involved, and how to remove it without destroying the company itself. And the coffee serving, the everything else? I laughed, a sound that felt strange after months of enforced silence. That was the hardest part, actually. Do you know how difficult it is to pretend to be grateful when someone snaps their fingers at you? To smile and nod when they're talking about you like you're not even human? I can imagine. No, I said quietly. I don't think you can. But that's okay. Most people can't. That's why this worked so well. Robert walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. So what happens now? You own 51% of my company. You could liquidate everything, sell off the assets, fire everyone. I could, I agreed. But that's not why I'm here. Then why? I joined him at the window, looking out at the city where thousands of people were starting their workdays, most of them unaware that their lives were about to get a little bit better. Because this company has good bones, Robert. Good people, good products, good relationships with clients who deserve better than they've been getting. The problem wasn't Hartwell Industries. It was the people running it into the ground. And now? Now we rebuild. We bring back the 23 employees who were laid off in the past year because David and his friends were stealing the money that should have been paying their salaries. We restore the client relationships that were damaged by Thomas's betrayals. We create a culture where someone's worth isn't measured by the price of their shoes or the size of their salary. My phone buzzed with another text. This one was from my head of HR at Rodriguez Holdings, reviewed the Hartwell employee files. Found 47 people who were passed over for promotions they deserved, 12 who were demoted for questioning irregular practices, and 8 who quit rather than participate in the corruption. Ready to make offers? I typed back, make the calls. Full reinstatement, back pay, and promotions they should have had. You're really going to fix this place, aren't you? Robert asked. We're going to fix this place, I corrected. I may own the majority stake, but I'm going to need someone who knows the company, knows the industry, knows which people can be trusted and which ones need to go. You want me to stay? I want you to be my partner in this. Real partner, not just a figurehead. Help me turn Hartwell Industries into the company it was supposed to be before greed and corruption took over. The phone on the conference table rang, the old-fashioned landline that connected directly to the CEO's office. Robert answered it, his voice crisp and professional. Hartwell Industries, Robert Hartwell speaking. I could hear the voice on the other end, excited and slightly out of breath. Mr. Hartwell, this is Jenny Martinez from Martinez Manufacturing. I just heard on the news about the arrests at your company. Does this mean, are we going to be able to finish our project now? Robert looked at me, and I nodded. Ms. Martinez, he said, I'd like you to meet our new partner, Elena Rodriguez. I think you two have a lot to discuss. I took the phone, and for the first time in 3 months, I used my real voice to conduct real business. Jenny, It's Elena. Yes, we're going to finish the project. In fact, we're going to do better than finish it. We're going to make it everything it was supposed to be. As I talked with Jenny about timelines and budgets and the kind of partnership that should exist between honest companies, I caught my reflection in the conference room window. The woman looking back at me still wore the simple black dress and sensible shoes, but everything else had changed. The posture, the expression, the entire presence. This was who I really was, not the quiet coffee server who'd endured 3 months of casual cruelty, but the CEO who'd built a billion-dollar empire through intelligence, determination, and an absolute refusal to accept that things had to stay the way they were. Over the next hour, the conference room filled with new people. My legal team, my accountants, my human resources director, all of them efficient professionals who understood that we had a company to rebuild and not much time to do it. But first, there was one more call to make. I dialed the number from memory, and it was answered on the first ring. David Chen's office. This is Elena Rodriguez. I need to speak with David. I'm sorry, but Mr. Chen is unavailable at the moment? Can I take a message? Tell him his coffee's getting cold. I hung up, and for the first time in 3 months, I laughed. Really laughed. The kind of deep, genuine laughter that comes from knowing that justice isn't just a concept in law books. Sometimes it's something you can serve with cream and sugar. The Wall Street Journal wanted an interview. The Justice Department wanted my cooperation. The business world was going to want to understand how someone had infiltrated a major corporation and exposed systematic corruption without anyone noticing. But right now, I had a company to run and people to help. Employees who deserved better, clients who'd been cheated, an entire corporate culture that needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. It was going to be a lot of work. I couldn't wait to get started. If this revenge story gave you chills, smash that like button. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in Elena's position? And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories about people who refuse to stay down. Share this with someone who needs to remember they're more powerful than they know. The end.